right, folks, welcome to a solo podcast. We are exploring RPGs in my backlog. This is Prof from Prof and Dev Play Games podcast here on my spin-off podcast, The RPG Backlog. If you like our podcast, please rate it on your podcast service of choice. Visibility really helps. Glad that we're growing an audience here. What I usually do is talk with friends and go over a game that we're playing together from our backlogs. We just did Final Fantasy Adventure, and we've got a few games coming up next. We've got Witcher 2, and we've got the original Final Fantasy. Not sure which will go first. But this week, and these interstitials between the arcs that I have, I like to talk about a game that I'm playing on my own. And right now I'm playing Yakuza Like a Dragon. I call these segments an evening with, but I played a couple more evenings with Yakuza Like a Dragon than just one. I'm probably 6 hours in, so I want to give my thoughts 6 hours in. First, talk a little bit about what this game is. Yakuza Like a Dragon, reading from the Wikipedia. It's a game developed by Ryu Ga Gotoku Studio, which is the ones who do Yakuza. This is the 8th mainline Yakuza game. There are lots of spin-offs. And this is the first one that used the Like a Dragon name outside of Japan. Ryu Ga Gotoku means like a dragon, and the games in Japan have that name. They are Like a Dragon. Now the series has changed to be Like a Dragon. For example, the game that followed this one was Like a Dragon Gaiden, the man who erased his name, which follows the main character of the Yakuza series before this game, Kiryu. I think it's Kiryu Kazuma. And those events happen concurrently with Yakuza Like a Dragon. And then the new one that came out this year, 2024, was Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. So it dropped that Yakuza name totally. Although the next one that's coming out is, I think, Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii, I think is the one that's coming out in February of 2025. So we've got the Yakuza name back in there. In a previous solo podcast on this feed, I talked about Yakuza 0, which was like a prequel to Yakuza 1, basically. And it focused on gameplay that was a brawler. So basically, direct inputs leading to punches, kicks, a heat system, just a brawler like you'd think about Final Fight or things like that, except it's not a side-scroller, obviously. But this is the first one that this studio has made as turn-based. And I've heard about this game for a really long time. It came out in, I believe, November of 2020. November 10th, 2020. And in the West, at least. It came out earlier in Japan and such. But it's the first one that did the turn-based combat. And a lot of the podcasts that I listened to were just raving about this game and how great it was, how great the story is, which I'll talk about in a moment. But that it had this turn-based combat. And I thought that would be something like a traditional RPG where your character is on one side of the screen, the other character is on the other side of the screen, and you're kind of doing your button inputs. But it really maintains that brawler aesthetic where you're just like right in the mix with the characters. And sometimes your positioning matters if there's an enemy between you and the enemy you're trying to attack. Sometimes when you select your input to like do a special move or do like a punch, a regular move, you run through the first enemy and they'll stop you. They'll block you. So you got to think about positioning a little bit. But really, even though the characters are kind of like moving in their brawling, animations, and it looks like you're in a real-time brawl, everything's paused in terms of actions. So you input your commands, and it's turn-based. So you go, your partner goes, then the other team goes, or whatever. But it also has elements of Mario RPG in that it has the real action combat or whatever it was called, where when they're attacking you, you can hit a button, you hit B, and I'm playing on Steam Deck. So you hit B and it blocks. You can do a perfect guard, basically. So it has elements that keep you engaged during that turn-based combat, much like Mario RPG does, which is really cool. So the thing that's interesting about this game to me is the story. So I'm probably 5.5 hours into the game, and it's honestly been about 85% cutscene. I've basically watched 2 movies worth of story. And usually I don't like that. Usually I play at night when my family's asleep. That's when I have my game time. Work's done, family commitments are done, and I play at night. But when it's heavy cutscene and I'm not really controlling the character, I get sleepy. And that happened famously for me with Final Fantasy 16. I talk about this a lot on the main feed, Prof and Dev Play Games. Final Fantasy 16 has a ton of cutscenes. It's about 50% cutscene and 50% direct control of the character, action sort of thing. And it's a great story, but God, it puts me to sleep. And this game, Yakuza Like Dragon, same situation, late at night, tons of cutscenes. I'm riveted. I cannot put it down. I don't want to put it down. I stay up later than I want to, following the story. And it's the story of not Kazuma Kiryu. He's the main character in the Yakuza series 1 through 7, and some of the spin-offs, obviously. But there's a new protagonist here. His name is Ichiban Kasuga. And it's interesting for me playing this game sort of directly after Yakuza 0. I've heard so much about Yakuza. Yakuza 0 seemed like the place to start. People were saying, if you're going to start Yakuza, get into it, check it out, go to Yakuza 0. I did. I played for 6, 7, 8, 9 hours, something like that, and got my fill. I understood what the game was about, understood who Kazuma Kiryu was. The brawling aesthetic wasn't super engaging for me. The story was interesting, but not as interesting as the Yakuza Like Dragon story, which I'll get into. So, I got a feel for it. I don't think I need to play the other Yakuza to really understand the story. He is a Yakuza who is kicked out of the Yakuza. He's framed for murder in that first game, Yakuza 0, and then the story progresses from there. And playing this, Yakuza Like a Dragon, I was surprised because Ichiban Kasuga, in the same way as Yakuza 0, decides to take the fall for a fellow Yakuza and admits to the murder and goes to jail. So he's barred from the Yakuza, basically banned and exiled. And then he takes the fall and goes to jail. He's supposed to be there for 15 years, gets in one fight, and it's extended for 3 years. And he has like a father-son relationship with his patriarch, the patriarch of the Yakuza that he's a member of. Part of the Todo clan, Arakawa, I think is the family name. But when he gets out, the patriarch basically turns his back on him, and Ichiban is trying to figure out, what the fuck? We were good friends. We were like father and son. What is happening? And he tries to go and confront him and gets shot. The patriarch shoots him, and then he wakes up in a homeless encampment in Yokohama, I think. So outside of Kamurocho. So we're in a new area, right, outside of Kamurocho. And then he befriends a homeless gentleman in his camp, and a story progresses from there. And you're building a party, basically, with some of the people that you meet. And that story is just like, it's super rich, even though it's like a huge echo of the Yakuza 0 story. I don't know if all the Yakuza games start where you just take the fall for somebody, but, this Ichiban guy goes to jail for 18 years, comes out, looks exactly the same, except he's got some frizzy hair now. And then he's, picking up a party as he's going. I've got 3 characters so far with me. The homeless dude, there's an ex-cop. Eventually there's going to be a woman as well, which I'm looking forward to picking up, kind of diversify the cast a little bit. But he, wakes up in Yokohama, is healed, brought back to life in some way by the homeless guy who used to be a nurse. And then he's kind of in the middle of a turf war between 3 factions in Yokohama. There's a Korean mafia, there's the Yakuza, and then there's a Chinese gang. Excuse me. So it's kind of like navigating that while he's trying to get on his feet, get money, get a job. And the story just comes. Really interesting narrative where it's not quite what you expect. It is an RPG. Obviously, this is an RPG turn-based, but it's an RPG where the character in the game wants to be a hero in an RPG. He talks repeatedly about Dragon Quest. Like, everyone in the game knows about Dragon Quest, talk about defeating slimes, leveling up, and he's viewing his life as an RPG at this point where he wants to become the hero. He wants to level up. He wants to, find dreams and achieve them. And it's like a meta commentary on being in an RPG while they're in an RPG, in a real world RPG. They're very much talking about themselves as RPG characters. They don't know they're in a game. That's not that meta, but they're talking about the conceit of an RPG, and as they're going. And I think in chapter 4, right where I'm at, right towards the end, they are leaving a situation where they were making some money doing a guard kind of duty for this old woman at a bar. And they come across a baseball bat sticking out of the ground. And it looks like Excalibur. It looks like the Master Sword buried in the pedestal you got to pull out from Legend of Zelda. Name any number of RPGs where there's a sword hidden in the middle of a forest and you've got to pick it up. So Ichiban's party members, the homeless guy and the ex-cop, try to lift it up. They can't. So then Ichiban grabs it and pulls it out with all of his might, and it's just this glowing, barbed wire covered baseball bat. And he talks about how he's the hero. His job class changes to hero. He gains new abilities. And it's fucking awesome. It's talking about the trappings of RPGs within this RPG, within this real world. And Ichiban is trying to live out that fantasy. And it does such a nice job of mixing that kind of meta with an engaging, grounded story of this down and out Yakuza who's now homeless and building a really poignant conversations with this homeless gentleman that is part of his party and also this ex-cop, and interacting with people in a very kind way and trying to do right and just guided by the principles of a Dragon Quest, of an old school RPG where like you are the hero. I mean, the name of the character in Dragon Quest is Hero. When they came over to Smash Brothers, it was Hero. So he's very much living that out. And it's really so different. I know for everyone who played all the Yakuza games, so different from the other Yakuza games. Obviously, I only played a little bit of Zero. But it's so different yet so similar. And the story, the writing, the beats seem similar. The gameplay looks similar, but it's obviously very different because it's turn-based. But the writing is so rich. The interactions between the characters is what's building this game. And I think these are my favorite kind of games where the story is not like there's this huge, pestilence coming across the kingdom and you've got to defeat the big bad evil. This is like so many small, narrow character moments where you're really getting to know the people who are with you and knowing about their dreams, their hopes, their fears, their anxieties. It is such a huge scoped game in terms of this big Yakuza story, this big dramatic Japanese mafia story. But then there's so many tiny, small little moments along the way that they're beautiful. And again, I'm only 6 hours in. I know this is probably a 30 to 40 hour game, so the story is going to grow. I'm really interested to find out if the ratio of cutscene to action continues, because it really is like watching a movie. And I find it so interesting. It's, video games are interactive media, and it's really always been a good mix of telling you story, but then so much gameplay, lots and lots of gameplay. One of my favorite video games of all time, Witcher 3, tons of story, but tons of action. And this is very much way more story, less action. You're still able to go around and grind, and that becomes part of their discussion about grinding for money. So, grinding for EXP in an RPG, they're talking about grinding for money. They're talking about it very much in those terms. And I know from what I've heard on podcasts, there's a difficulty spike later, so that grinding is really important. So running around and finding different Yakuza, different thugs on the street to battle and gain that experience is important. But there's not a lot of moments where that happens because you're kind of tripped into automatic story cutscenes, automatic story narrative that takes you out of the kind of free roam. So I'm assuming there's going to be more of that later. And maybe it'll balance out where there's a little less cutscene moving forward, but I'm not sure how, because they are so deeply committed to fleshing out these characters really deeply. Mostly through voiced cutscenes. There are some where it's just text-based. There's little grunts and yeah as they're talking, and so you're kind of reading. And then there's an interesting system that I've only interacted with once, where as you're walking around, there will be a prompt, the Y button, and then you have another side conversation. And if you have the side conversation with them in those moments, you start to deepen your relationship with the characters. And when I did that, I think that's when I opened up like a tag team move between the two characters, which is very much like a synergy move from Final Fantasy VII Remake that I'm also playing right now. Kind of a unblockable There's no button inputs during that action combat. It's just like it happens, which is really cool. There is a character later who is in charge of a brothel, I think, and they take you in and you live there and you kind of protect them or whatever. And there is this other group called Bleach Japan, which is a political entity that's trying to I think they describe it in the game as Japan is full of gray areas where the law is being broken but nobody's hurt. So things kind of exist in that gray area, and this Bleach Japan group wants to cleanse Japan of those gray zones. We're talking about prostitution, we're talking about immigration without documentation, we're talking about Yakuza, organized crime, things like that. So there's a lot of those kind of rich, germane narrative offshoots that you would expect in a society where these kinds of things happen, but we dig into those characters. We dig into Ichiban's reaction. He's very much like the hero and wants to be the strong person to help save people. And his teammate right now, the homeless gentleman, is very much I fucking no. Let's stay away. Let's not get involved. Let's leave all this and not add to our troubles, my friend. But Ichiban is very much that head first Leroy Jenkins character. I'm just going to do this thing and we're going to do it now and save everybody kind of thing. So it's kind of a nice mix where there is commentary on the hero archetype and hey, let's actually think about this and maybe let's not get involved. And hey, what the fuck is this baseball bat you just picked up? And when he picks up the baseball bat, by the way, he starts to see enemies as malformed, mutated, and only he can see it. So it becomes even more I'm battling monsters, which is cool. The thing that I'm really interested in moving forward is the main mystery and story around the Patriarch. Patriarch is of the Arakawa family, Masumi Arakawa, who I'm just learning. I actually didn't realize this. I recognized the voice, but I couldn't quite place it. It's George Takei. George Takei is the voice of Arakawa, which is really, really cool. The game is taking place in 2019 now. I think the murder happened in 2001, so we fast forward 18 years. It's 2019, which was a year before the game released. The game released, like I said, in Japan and Asia, I think in January 2020, right before COVID. And then, boom, COVID, and this game releases November 2020. I think that's, not a reason, but, this is a huge game, and people were really, really interested in big long games where we're hanging out at home doing nothing. So I think this hit in a way that I don't know if it would have hit differently otherwise, but I'm really glad that it did. I've been hearing about it for 4 years, wanted to finally jump in. I'm seeing that Goro Majima, who is the main character in the pirate Yakuza, which is so interesting. I saw that and that's when I started playing this game because I want to get to that pirate Yakuza game and check it out. So thinking I should probably play this and Infinite Wealth, which I have, and I'm going to try to get through these two games this year. So I might come back with an update on this podcast later. But I'm seeing that Goro Majima in this game, at least, is voiced by Matthew Mercer, which is pretty awesome. The guy from Critical Role. I love Critical Role, so that's very, very cool. The interesting thing about this studio and this game was announced in 2017. It came out in 2020. Infinite Wealth came out this year, 2024. Pirate Yakuza coming out in 2025. And Pirate Yakuza was developed the middle of the development of this game. So 2017 to 2020, so probably 2019, they split off to start doing Pirate Yakuza. So 2019 to 2025. And right now there's a lot of stories about Ryugo Gotoku Studio just putting out maybe not banger after banger, although it has some really good games, but just really solid game after solid game in a franchise. If you're a Yakuza fan, you are fucking eating well. We've got so many games coming out in the last 5-6 years, including some remasters like Yakuza Kiwami and Kiwami 2, which is a remaster of 1 and 2. It's really, there's a lot. And they've talked about how they don't understand how other companies aren't doing the same thing. They treat it like a TV series where they reuse assets, they reuse character models, they reuse locations. We're in Kamurocho a fucking ton throughout the Yakuza series. Why remake shit every single iteration of the game just to make a new story in there? Sort of like Link Majora's Mask after Ocarina of Time, where it kind of reused all the assets and remixed a brand new, fucking really wildly different game. So it's pretty cool. Looking here, it's talking about the staff of the game who created this game said that they wanted to try a different style of gameplay by going to the turn-based combat, and that if it was badly received, they would simply return to real-time combat for the future. But it was received really well, so they've kept it, and they're keeping it for the Yakuza games. The Like a Dragon games moving forward. Wow, I didn't realize this either. Matt Mercer is doing Goro Majima, replacing Mark Hamill, who used to do Goro Majima. Wow, so much cool shit here. David Hayter is playing a character as well, as a bartender character. So much cool shit that I'm learning about in this Wikipedia here in real time with you. It's something that's been on my backlog for a while, and I'm so glad I'm doing this series because this is... I struggle to say, like, may become one of my favorite games because so much of what I like about it right now is the story. So I may say it's like one of my favorite stories in the game so far. God, it's really good. And if it's as received well as it is and people just continue to talk about this game on podcasts that I listen to, this has got to maintain its energy throughout. So I'm really excited to see what happens on the way forward with this game. And I'll come back for sure and have a second podcast about this when I beat the game because unlike Yakuza 0, after an evening with this game or a couple evenings with the game, I have no intention of stopping playing this game. In fact, it's my number one game I'm playing right now. Aside from Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom just released yesterday, so I'm playing that with my daughter during our game time. But my game time at night when everyone's asleep and the work is done, Yakuza Like a Dragon, I cannot, at least from the first 6 hours, recommend it enough. Thanks for listening. If you love this podcast, please tell your friends. Go back and listen to the other podcasts. We've got Final Fantasy Adventure. We've got, boy, what was the first one we did? So many games that we've done, and I'm blanking. Oh, Final Fantasy 12. This is not quite a Final Fantasy podcast, but when you go back to the backlog of role-playing games, Final Fantasy looms large. All right, folks, thanks so much, and I will see you next time.